I'm Evelyn Carter, a woman in her 60s who spent a lifetime running a little corner bakery. I thought I had a peaceful family, a devoted husband, a dutiful son, and a daughter-in-law I loved, as if she were my own. And then, in a single night, everything I believed in blew to ashes. Because there is no pain sharper than discovering that the man who stood beside you for 40 years has betrayed you with the very woman you once called your daughter. But I'm not telling this story to mourn. I'm telling it because at the bottom of humiliation and ruin, I found another kind of strength, the will to protect what's mine, my dignity, and to shield my son Daniel from a stain no one saw coming. People assume women my age only know how to endure and look the other way. They're wrong. I turned tears into steel, pain into a plan, and when I moved, nothing stayed the same. Listen to the end, because this story will show you. The sweetest revenge sometimes needs no knives or screams, only a tube of cold glue and a shattered heart. Before we begin this journey together, subscribe, turn on the notifications, share this story, and leave a comment where you're listening. And now, come back with me to the night it all began, the strange perfume on my husband's shirt that sparked a nightmare, and also the first step toward the most searing revenge of his life. Sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive with a bang. It slips in quietly, like the scent of someone else's perfume on your husband's shirt. I'd lived with Richard Carter for nearly 40 years. I knew every crease on his forehead, every little habit, the way he'd sprinkle extra salt into my soup, the way he'd grumble if his shoes weren't polished, the way he'd claim work is busy to skip dinner with me. But that night, when Richard walked in, I sensed something different. Not the shifty eyes, not the rumpled suit. It was the smell, a sweet, unfamiliar perfume clinging stubbornly to the collar of his shirt. I stood in the kitchen, still holding the spoon over a simmering pot of soup. The room was so quiet, I could hear the wall clock tick, each second a dull drumbeat. I'd heard that clock 1,000 times, but never had it sounded so shrill. Every tick jabbed at my chest, whispering, "Something's wrong, Evelyn, something's wrong." Richard came in, loosening his tie like he'd just wriggled free of a noose. He tossed his jacket onto a chair, collapsed onto the sofa, and closed his eyes. Exhausted, he muttered, with just the right touch of theatrics. I gave a thin smile. At my age, I can tell the difference between real fatigue and cheap performance. I can smell a lie, even when it's lacquered in expensive perfume. I walked over and lifted the shirt he'd draped over the chair. I did the dutiful wife gesture, ready to take it to the wash. But instead of burying myself in chores, I stopped. I leaned in and inhaled deeply. There was no mistaking it. It wasn't mine. Not the perfume I wore on anniversaries. This was someone else's. Younger, bolder, sweet enough to make me gag. Richard didn't know it, but a storm was rising in me. I said nothing. No accusation, no question. I set the shirt back where it was, quiet as an old detective, and let him drift into his guilty sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at a cup of coffee going cold. In the silence, my heartbeat synced with the clock, each tick a warning. This man isn't yours anymore. That night, I moved through the living room, tidying the things Richard had tossed around, jacket, wallet, and then his phone. The screen was lit, an unread email sitting there. I froze. For years, Richard claimed he hated technology. "Evelyn, I don't have the patience for email. I just call." And yet, Right in front of me, an email. I opened it, just a few short lines. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." I read it over and over, my fingers trembling. Dad. Who calls my husband Dad like that? A red heart, brazen and intimate enough to make me sick. I staggered inside as if someone had slapped me. The room tightened around me. The clock still ticked, but now it sounded like mockery, laughing at how long I'd believed. I glanced at Richard. He was snoring on the sofa, face peaceful as a child's, a filthy child who had just stolen my old age. I set the phone down, willing my hands not to shake. I knew this was only the first shard of a filthy mosaic yet to be revealed, but one shard was enough to tell me. From this moment on, I was no longer yesterday's Evelyn. I drew a breath. The soup had gone sour with chill, but it was still easier to stomach than the strange perfume ghosting Richard's collar, and I told myself, "Fine. If you want to play games, Richard, I'll be the one to write the ending." I stood and went to the bedroom, my heart thudding. I didn't sleep. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, listening to Richard snoring like a parody soundtrack. And in my head, the question kept echoing, who was calling my husband Dad, and why with a bright red heart? If I'd dug deeper that night, maybe I would have been better prepared for the truth. Instead, I waited for more proof, and that decision opened the door to a betrayal my neighborhood had never seen. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains and fell across the floor in tired yellow streaks. Richard was up early. He didn't even wait for me to make the coffee like he usually did. He tossed off a line on his way out. "I have an important meeting. Won't be home till late." Then the door closed behind him. Familiar words, but today they left a different aftertaste, like a stain on a white tablecloth, small but impossible to wash out. I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the half-finished mug he'd left behind. The steam drifted up like a pale mist, then disappeared, just like my trust. I told myself, "Evelyn, it's time to stop being naive." I started in the living room, where Richard always dropped his things. I picked up his wallet, my hands unsteady but my resolve honed like a blade. I had never invaded my husband's privacy, but when privacy turns into secrets, my loyalty becomes the punchline. Inside the wallet, besides a few bills and credit cards, was a neatly folded receipt. I opened it, and my heart hit the floor. A bill from an upscale restaurant downtown, a place Richard had never taken me. The date was clear, last night. Guests, too. A bottle of Cabernet, the kind we used to drink for our 10th anniversary. A wine I'd told him again and again I loved, and which he hadn't bothered to buy in over a decade. I stared at the receipt like it was a breakup letter. Candlelight, wine, a dinner for two, the things I'd longed for, given to someone else. A bitter laugh scraped out of my throat. I slid the receipt back into his wallet, straightened it as if untouched, but I knew every detail had etched itself into me. That afternoon, I went down to the garage. Richard had left the old SUV, the one he drove whenever he had work. I opened the door. The air smelled of worn leather and gasoline, but beneath those familiar notes was something else. Sweet, heavy, clingy. The perfume again, haunting me like a ghost. I opened the glove compartment. In the dim space, my fingers brushed something slick. I drew it out, and my chest cinched tight. A tube of lubricant. Cap half snapped open. A rim of gel congealed around the mouth. I stood frozen, listening to the weighted silence of the garage. Richard and I hadn't been intimate in years. He always had reasons: age, work, health. And now, tube of lubricant, sitting brazenly in his car, proof of another life, another body. I held it like a knife still wet. My hand shook so hard I shoved it back into the compartment and wiped my fingers clean, as if that smear could infect my skin with betrayal. Leaning against the car door, I closed my eyes. 40 years of marriage, shattered by a strange scent in a cheap plastic tube. I stepped out of the garage and drew a long breath of the cold afternoon air. Inside me, the pain was hardening into something else, sharper, quieter. No more tears, only resolve. That night, after Richard went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table under the weak yellow lamp. On the table, the restaurant receipt, the phone he'd forgotten, and in my mind the image of that tube of lubricant lying mute in the car. An entire second life, under my roof, and I was never allowed through the door. I picked up my own phone, opened my contacts, and found an old number a friend had once mentioned. Mr. Harris, private investigator. Back then, I laughed. I thought I'd never need it. I believed in my husband. I believed in marriage. But in the oven's dark glass, my reflection stared back. A different woman now. Not the gentle Evelyn who trusted. The Evelyn who had woken up. I dialed, my heart pounding against my ribs. The rings stretched time thin. A gravelly, steady voice answered. Harris speaking. Who is this? I drew a deep breath, kept my voice even while my nails bit my palm. Mr. Harris, this is Evelyn Carter. I need your help. I have to know the truth about my husband. I didn't know that call would be the fuse. Because once the truth begins to surface, it doesn't stop. Not until your whole life has been torn open, piece by piece. I met Mr. Harris in a dim little cafe downtown, where the yellow lights fell over old wooden tables. He arrived a few minutes late. Short, solid build, salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp as a blade. People say detectives hide their feelings, but I could see it in him right away. The weary understanding of a man who's witnessed too many marriages collapse. Mrs. Carter, he said, shaking my hand, rough, steady. Yes, and please, call me Evelyn. He didn't make small talk. He set a thick envelope on the table and slid it toward me. I think you'll want to see this. I stared at it like a Pandora's box. Inside was the truth I both craved and feared. I opened it, hands trembling. Photographs slipped out one by one, skittering across the table like knives. In the first photo, Richard sat in an upscale restaurant, a glass of deep red Cabernet before him. But it wasn't the wine that stole my breath. It was his hand, holding the hand of a younger woman. I brought the photo closer, heart pounding. The woman wore a fitted black dress, hair loose over her shoulders, her face tilted toward Richard, lips curved in a smile. And the way he looked at her, warm, gentle, as if admiring a precious treasure. When I recognized the face, I nearly dropped the picture. Lena, my daughter-in-law. The same woman who called me Mom every Thanksgiving, who hugged me in front of the neighbors to prove her affection, who ate my flan and praised it to the skies. Lena, Daniel's wife, the wife of my only son. I bit my lip until it bled. Anyone nearby would have seen my face turn to stone. Harris said nothing, just watched, eyes chilled, letting me swallow the pain on my own. I turned to the next photo, Richard and Lena facing each other, twin glasses between them. They leaned in to whisper, and Richard smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in 20 years, the smile of a man in love. I remembered the times Daniel joked, "Mom, I don't think Lena and Dad click. They can't hold a conversation." I laughed it off, thought they just didn't mesh. Turns out, it was the perfect stage play. Each following photo was another blow. Lena leaning in to touch Richard's hand. Richard lifting his glass, eyes never leaving her. Between them, a quiet intimacy, a relationship I wouldn't have imagined in my worst nightmare. I didn't feel anger, not yet. First came the total collapse, like the foundation of a house I'd spent my life building suddenly split open, and I was falling into an endless void. "Mrs. Carter," Harris said slowly, "I know this is hard to believe, but the truth is often the cruelest thing." I closed the photos, steadying my voice. "Thank you. Keep watching them. I need proof. As much as you can get." He nodded. "You'll have it." I left the cafe clutching the envelope like a bomb. Outside, cold wind stirred yellow leaves along the sidewalk. I felt like a figure out of a dark fable, the aging wife who enters the forest and discovers the wolf wasn't outside at all. It had been living in her house. Back home, I sat in the kitchen. The familiar room felt foreign. Every chair, every spoon, stained with betrayal. I looked at the photos again. Lena, my daughter-in-law, sitting there with Richard, fingers intertwined, eyes shining with a cursed kind of love. A dry, bitter laugh escaped me. Remarkable, really. I'd raised a snake under my roof, taught her to cook, trusted her with my son, and in return, she drove a knife straight into my back. I stood, opened a drawer, and took out a family photo. Daniel, Lena, Richard, and me. Last Christmas. I studied Lena's gentle smile, her good daughter-in-law eyes. I crushed the picture in my fist, listening to the paper crackle like breaking bones. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room with only my phone's glow. Then a text from Harris arrived. A video. I pressed play. Richard stood by the familiar SUV, door open. He leaned in, all gallantry. Lena stepped out, hair lifting in the breeze, face radiant. Richard looked at her with an awful tenderness, the kind he hadn't shown me since the early years of our marriage. I paused the video. The tears wouldn't fall, not because I was strong, but because the pain had dried up, leaving only a blank, black space. If Richard and Lena thought they could hide forever in the dark, they forgot who I am. I'm Evelyn Carter, and I've learned to see through the night. What I'm about to do next will make them wish they'd never laid a hand on each other. In the days that followed, my phone became a double-edged knife. Every time the screen lit up with a message from Mr. Harris, my heart tightened with fear and flared with a hunger for the truth. One rainy afternoon, with thunder rolling in the distance, I received a new batch of photos. I opened each one with cold hands. Richard and Lena again, this time not in a candlelit restaurant, but in front of a law office. The gold-lettered sign read, "Henderson and Cole, attorneys at law." Richard wore a gray suit, the picture of a successful businessman. Lena had on a beige work dress, hair swept into a neat bun, oversized black sunglasses covering half her face. If I didn't know the truth, anyone might have thought they were father and daughter signing a contract. But Harris had scrawled a note under the photo. "Doesn't look like business. Too close. Whispering like lovers." I swiped to the second photo. They stood right by the office door, Richard's hand resting at the small of Lena's back, a protective gesture. Lena leaned in, a smile she could barely hide behind the glasses. I ground my teeth. That wasn't a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. It was a pair plotting a filthy future. Harris didn't just send pictures. He attached an audio file. I sat in the quiet kitchen, turned the volume low, and listened to the warped but unmistakable voices. First, Lena, voice sharp as a blade, hurry up with the fake contracts. That old woman won't know what hit her. My knuckles went white against the table's edge. The old woman. That was me. The woman who raised their only son, who built a bakery from nothing, who worked through the night to pay for Daniel's schooling, reduced to 2 words, like a thorn to be yanked out. Then Richard's voice, steady as if rehearsed 100 times. Relax, Lena. She trusts me too much. Leave it in my hands. It slammed into me like a death sentence. Not just betrayal of love. Not just an affair with my daughter-in-law. Richard planned to strip away the blood and sweat I'd poured out for decades. The bakery chain, the shops I opened with bank loans, the late bills, the all-night shifts in front of the ovens had become their target. I sat still, replayed the recording again, then again. Each time my blood ran hotter, like a fire eating me from the inside. I remembered Richard standing in the kitchen with me the day we opened our first store, lifting a glass. Evelyn, this will be our legacy. That promise was a joke now. He'd only been waiting for the right moment to seize it and toss me out like an outdated employee. Rain began to hammer the roof. The drip and thud sounded like war drums. I took a thick envelope and carefully slid in everything. The restaurant receipt, the photos of Richard and Lena holding hands, the video of him opening the car door for her, and now the shots outside the law office and the recording. I sealed the envelope and set it deep in a drawer under a stack of old papers. My hands were trembling, but not from fear anymore. It was the tremor of a woman who has decided she will not sit still. The kitchen glowed with dull yellow light. I looked around, sheet pans, sacks of flour, cake molds, every tool I'd lived with all my life, witnesses to my labor, my faith, the love I'd poured into this family. And now this very family was scheming to burn it all to ash. A dry laugh scraped out of me. Fake contracts, I repeated, tasting the bitterness. If Richard thinks I'm some gullible old wife, he's about to learn an expensive lesson. I folded the envelope down, tucked it deep into the drawer, and locked it with the old key. The evidence was safe, and in my chest, a vow boomed as heavy as the thunder outside. Evelyn Carter will not wait to be thrown away. I will be the storm they never saw coming. They think they're trapping me in the dark, but I was forged beside a hot oven, and from ashes, I know how to bake something sweet, or incinerate an entire life of lies. That night, Richard came home late. He was soaked in liquor, stumbling through the door, his breath thick with cheap whiskey and that unfamiliar perfume. I was sitting in the kitchen pretending to read an old book, eyes skimming pages without seeing a word. I watched every move he made. He tossed his coat onto a chair, kicked off his shoes, and staggered toward the bedroom. His car keys hit the table with a sharp clang, rolled once, then settled under the yellow light. I'm not superstitious, but in that moment, they gleamed like an invitation from fate. Richard collapsed onto the bed, snoring before he could pull up the covers. I stood, moving lightly, a cat on the hunt. My fingers closed around the keyring, cold, heavy, as if it carried the weight of his sins. I didn't rush. I sat again, listening to the steady rise and fall of his breath. When I was certain the drink had dragged him under, I slipped quietly into the garage. The door gave a faint, whining scrape, as if it knew a crime was being prepared. His familiar SUV waited in the dark. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, a thin blade of light cutting the stale air, and aimed it at the glove compartment. I opened it, and there it was, just like before. The tube of lubricant, cap half popped, a living piece of evidence. I took it out, weighing it in my hand. Such a small thing, enough to shove a woman like me to the edge of a cliff. I drew a long breath and set it on the workbench. Then I opened the tool drawer. The industrial adhesive was right where I'd left it, the kind I'd used to fix a broken chair at the bakery. My hand trembled, but my eyes were ice. I twisted off the lube cap and squeezed out what remained. Then I picked up the adhesive and drop by drop filled the tube. The glue oozed in, thick, glossy in the flashlight's beam. I swirled it gently, shook it, then wiped the mouth clean with a rag. Every motion was slow, exact, a ritual of revenge. In that moment, I wasn't the gentle Evelyn of 40 years ago. I was a witch over her cauldron, brewing a potion for a traitor. No blood, no knives, just a cold tube of glue, enough to turn their pleasure into a lifelong humiliation. I twisted the cap back on, set the doctored tube precisely where it had been in the compartment, adjusted the seat, closed the latch, erased every trace. Then I stood in the garage, listening to my heartbeat drum in my ears. Part of me wanted to cry, but I had run dry long ago. All that remained was a chilling clarity. I knew this moment would change everything. From now on, the game had a new set of rules. I returned to the house and placed the keys exactly where Richard had dropped them. In the bedroom, he still snored, mouth slack, oblivious that the verdict had already been written. I stood beside the bed and looked down at his flushed, liquor-bright face. The man who once promised to walk me to the end had fallen asleep like a child who'd become my cruelest enemy. I bent close and whispered so softly, only I could hear, "Tomorrow justice will taste bitter." Then I turned away and killed the light, letting the darkness swallow the room. They think I'm just a nagging old wife whose talents end at baking bread and scrubbing floors. Tomorrow, they'll learn this. Even flour and sugar become ash in a hot enough oven, and I'm the one who keeps the fire. That morning, I got up earlier than usual. I stood before the mirror, brushed my hair, put on light makeup, and slipped into a long gray coat. I wanted to look like a woman heading out of town on business. Richard was in the kitchen drinking coffee, still sleepy, but in that quick glance I caught something unusual. A flicker of relief, almost happiness. "Richard, I have to go sign a contract in Nashville today," I said evenly. "I'll probably be home late. Don't wait for dinner." He looked up, forcing a smile he couldn't hide behind. The relief in his eyes gave him away. "All right, go ahead. I'll take care of dinner." Dinner, I smirked. I knew exactly who his dinner would be. I rolled my small suitcase to the door and stepped down the front stoop, letting the door close behind me. But instead of heading to the bus station, I crossed the street and knocked on Mrs. Wilson's door, my longtime neighbor, sharp-eyed and tight-lipped. "Evelyn, where are you going with a suitcase?" she asked, eyes wide. "I need a spot with a view of my house, just for a few hours," I said softly. "You understand, don't you?" She asked nothing more. We sat by her upstairs window, a perfect vantage point over my home. In my hand was a phone connected to the recorder I'd hidden in the bedroom. Every sound in that house would stream straight into the earbuds in my ears. Around 10 a.m., a taxi pulled up out front. Lena stepped out, a light floral dress, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, a small shoulder bag. She looked around like a thief afraid of being caught, then slipped inside as Richard opened the door for her. Through the earbuds I heard their giggles, the clink of glass, heavy footsteps on wood, then Richard's voice. "We've got the whole house to ourselves now. No more hiding." Lena's laugh followed, bright, clean, sharp as a knife. The old woman finally left. This feels perfect. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. The old woman. Again, I was just a piece of trash to be hauled away. But I didn't cry. I simply reached for the thin cord connected to the gas range that I'd rigged the night before. One light tug, and in my kitchen a pan of oil flared, sending a thick column of black smoke billowing from the window. Smoke curled upward, wrapping the roof like a curse. Mrs. Wilson gasped. "Good Lord, your house is on fire." I pretended to panic too, but inside I was cool as ice. "It's probably just smoke," I murmured, eyes fixed on the window frame. In my ear the shouts erupted. "Richard, what is that? There's smoke." "Shut up, Lena, let me check." Silence. Then Lena's shriek split the air. "We're stuck. Oh my God, we're stuck." Richard's voice came back hoarse with fear. "Shut up. Stop screaming." I sat still, listening to the bed creak, to their panicked groans, to their desperate struggle to escape the trap I'd set with that tube of industrial glue. I could picture it clearly. Two traitors, naked, glued together in humiliation, thrashing in the smoke. Out on the street, neighbors started shouting, "Call the fire department. The Carter's place is burning." Someone had already called. Sirens began to keen in the distance, each wail like a funeral trumpet. I turned to Mrs. Wilson. She looked at me with a mix of fear and recognition, but said nothing. She only gripped my hand, as if we were both witnesses to a sentence handed down by the heavens on the faithless. The sirens grew louder. A red engine screeched to a stop in front of my house. Black smoke still poured from the kitchen window. Neighbors clustered, whispers rippling down the block. The cab door swung open. The first firefighter jumped down, helmet on, turnout gear gleaming. It was Daniel. My son. I stopped breathing. The blood in my veins went still. Daniel, the boy I loved, was running into that house, where his father and his wife were trapped in their sordid little play. If there was ever a moment when I wished I could jam a stick into the spokes of fate, it was then, when Daniel stepped into the smoke-choked house, unaware that what waited for him wasn't fire, but a betrayal that would scorch his life to the ground. The iron ram slammed against the front door with a funereal boom. Daniel shouted, "Back up! Breach!" Then, with one heavy strike, the wooden door burst open, splinters spraying across the porch. From Mrs. Wilson's window, my heart felt like it was being wrung out. My son had no idea he was about to walk into a nightmare, and I was the one who'd opened the gate. Through my earpiece, the house exploded into chaos. Richard's voice, ragged and panicked. "Daniel, don't come in, get out." Then Lena, sobbing, desperate, "Please help me." But Daniel was already inside, leading the crew. Boots hammered the hardwood, extinguishers clinked, voices barked orders through the smoke. The bedroom door crashed open. I didn't need to see it. I heard Daniel stop short like a boulder had hit his chest. A heavy silence, and then his voice broke. "What? What is this?" The firefighters behind him froze. One muttered, "Oh my God." Another snorted a bitter laugh until Daniel snapped, "Silence!" In my ear, the mattress groaned. Richard growled and thrashed. Lena sobbed and begged. I could picture it perfectly. Richard and Lena, naked, glued together by what they thought was pleasure, and now was a shackle of humiliation. Daniel, the boy I once lulled to sleep with fairy tales, stood in that room, staring at his father and his wife in the rawest form of betrayal. It wasn't the flames that burned him, it was the truth. The crew whispered, and someone let out a sour chuckle. Unbelievable. Outside, neighbors had gathered. As the smoke thinned, the murmurs started. "Is anyone in there?" I heard screaming. Dear God, is that Richard and Lena? Mrs. Wilson stood beside me, face taut. Evelyn, are you sure you want to keep going? I only nodded. It was far too late to turn back. Inside, Richard pleaded, his voice shredded. Daniel, please, you have to help your father. Don't let anyone see. Please cover us. But there was nothing left to cover. A young firefighter stammered. Chief, we can't move them like this. They're stuck. Daniel's voice cracked, firm but broken. Bring the sheets, now. Minutes later, I saw it. 2 stretchers wheeled out the front door. On them, Richard and Lena were wrapped hastily in thin white sheets, faces purpled with shame. Lena hung her head, sobs swallowed. Richard tried to hide his face but couldn't drown out the swarm of whispers. Phones clicked, videos rolled, flashes strobed, lighting every crease in Richard's face, every wet streak on Lena's cheeks. God, it's them, the father-in-law and the daughter-in-law, a woman cried. Shameless, absolutely shameless, a man muttered, shaking his head. The neighborhood kids whispered, eyes wide. Is that Mrs. Carter's husband? I stayed behind the curtain and listened. Humiliation spread faster than smoke. The whole block was now a witness. Richard tried again, voice gone thin. Daniel, you have to stop them. Don't let them see us like this. Too late. The truth was no longer his to manage. It was out in daylight, beyond the walls. Mrs. Wilson gave a small, cutting shake of her head. Evelyn, they wanted to take everything from you. Now they've lost everything. The ambulance wailed and pulled away with both stretchers, under the neighborhood's unblinking stare. Heads huddled together, fingers pointed, words sharp as knives. Poor Evelyn. I always knew something was off. Can you believe this? I clenched my hands until my nails bit skin. Not a single tear, only cold resolve. They thought the shame would stop at the bedroom door, but once that video left the block, beyond all those tapping thumbs, Richard and Lena would learn, betrayal doesn't just kill love, it kills reputation. And I would be there to witness every last bit of it. Hospitals at midnight smell like antiseptic, a clean, cold sting that pretends to scrub away filth but never touches shame. I sat on a hard plastic chair, both hands clamped around a thick envelope. Inside wasn't just the divorce papers, but everything else. Receipts, photos, video, audio. Enough to pulverize whatever was left of Richard and Lena. The door swung open. A young nurse stepped out, eyes a little apologetic. Mrs. Carter, your husband. He's awake. You can go in. I stood, each step heavy as lead. The room was stark white, fluorescent light washing everything pale. On the bed, Richard lay there, face dotted with ointment under gauze, eyes red from exhaustion and humiliation. Lena faced the wall, shoulders shaking, pillow wet with tears. Richard looked at me, his eyes full of pleading. Evelyn, I can explain. I set the envelope on the bedside table and slid it toward him. Don't bother. Explanations are for people with a shred of decency. You don't have any. His hands trembled as he lifted it. The moment he saw the divorce papers, his face went chalk white. Evelyn, you can't. After all these years, I cut him off, voice calm as ice. 40 years, Richard. I baked thousands of loaves. I stayed up nights for this family. I built this business with blood and tears. And you planned to steal it all with my daughter-in-law. Lena turned, eyes swollen, lips quivering. Mom, I raised a hand, blade sharp. Don't call me Mom. You were never my daughter. From now on, I'll use the right name. Lena, the betrayer. She broke down, reaching for Daniel's hand. My son leaned against the door frame, turnout gear still scented with smoke. He looked at his wife, eyes emptied out. "Daniel, please forgive me. I made a mistake," Lena sobbed. Daniel said nothing. He just turned and walked out, the door slamming like a final verdict. Richard rasped, "Evelyn, I'm begging you, don't do this. We can work this out." I gave a dry, brittle laugh that echoed off the white walls. "You wanted the bakery, the house, even my name. And what do you have now? A hospital bed, your daughter-in-law writhing beside you, and a town whispering your names with contempt. That's justice, Richard, my kind." I turned and left without looking back. Behind me, Richard's thin cry, "Evelyn, please," was clipped off as the nurse stepped in. Dawn was breaking when I returned to the bakery. The door chime tinkled as I opened it. Flour and vanilla wrapped around me like familiar arms. Daniel was already at the counter, uniform draped over a chair, eyes red but steady. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm staying. I'll help you." I didn't answer, just set my hand on his shoulder. Our silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like a pact. News moved like wind. The whole town knew about Richard and Lena. Neighbors murmured. Customers poured in like never before. They bought bread and brought looks that mixed sympathy with respect. "Evelyn, you're so strong," an older woman said as I bagged a loaf. "We're proud you didn't break." I smiled, not with joy, but with the expression of someone who's walked through hell and come back holding a fistful of ash as proof. Every loaf I pulled from the oven now carried more than flour and sugar. It carried a stitch of my soul mended back together. Laughter by the register, the smell of fresh bread. Each one sutured another crack. But at night, after I slid the bolt on the door, I still thought of Richard and Lena. I remembered his eyes, once my whole world, reduced to begging. I heard her voice, once sweet with Mom, now ringing like a counterfeit curse. I wiped my hands and stood in the bright kitchen. Everything Richard wanted is exactly where it belongs, with me. The bakery, the house, the name. He has nothing left but a humiliating story the town will murmur every time it hears his. I looked out the window at the reddening sky. A wry smile flickered. He wanted my bakery, my home, even my dignity. Now he has nothing but a story the whole town whispers about. What Richard and Lena don't know is that I'm not finished. This game has only begun, and sometimes the sweetest revenge is the part they never see coming. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.